What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Today marks the beginning of our annual NBA Top 30 countdown. For those of you that listen to the show for a long time, you probably know what's about to happen. But for those of you that are new, we have four panelists. So joining me today are going to be Matt, Clint, and Devin, longtime friends of the show. All four of us have submitted our list of who we think the top 30 players in the NBA are. And those lists have been put into one big composite fouled out list. So we're going to go through players 30 through 21 today and talk about who had them ranked higher, lower than where they ended up on the composite and why. It's going to be a lot of arguments over the course of the next 3 weeks of this podcast, talking about where players should and shouldn't be ranked. It's one of the funnest events that we do every year, and we look forward to it a lot. So next week, we'll be back with players 20 through 11, and then 2 weeks from now, 10 through 1. And I can tell you, looking at the composite list, there are some pretty crazy takes. There's some pretty out there players that are included, and where certain panelists that are going to be on this podcast have guys rank is going to be an interesting point of conversation over the next 3 weeks. So you're not going to want to miss any of it. But before we get started, a reminder that you can reach out to us, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. We really appreciate you guys listening and would love to hear from you. Send us who you think the top 30 players in the NBA are, and let us know where you think our list is wrong. And I'll tell you that nobody who's on the podcast the next 3 weeks has a list that perfectly matches the composite list. So we're going to be arguing about where everybody's wrong, but feel free to chime in. We'd really love to hear from you guys. With that said, let's go grab Matt. Let's grab Clint. Let's grab Devin, and let's go talk basketball. Let's go. Clint and Devin are here. We are back to the four-man booth for NBA Top 30. How is everybody doing?
Fantastic. Amazing. Woo. Thanks for having me on.
The quad pod.
I love the quad pod. The most we ever got up to was an 8-man pod. Yes, too many people on one podcast, but the quad pod works for the purposes of NBA Top 30. This podcast, we are going to count down from 30 to number 1. We have our composite rankings done. Everybody has voted. We spent the pre-show meeting talking about the college football video game coming out tomorrow and also roasting each other's rankings. So we're ready to break down the list. But I wanted to start with the honorable mentions before we get into the actual players. The honorable mentions are people who got votes from one or more of the panelists to be in the top 30, but did not make the composite list. So in order of least points to most, Derek White, Drew Holiday, DeMar DeRozan, Cade Cunningham, RJ Barrett, Desmond Bane, Ja Morant was an interesting omission from our list. Alperen Şengün and Lauri Markkanen, who missed the list by 1 point. And we're going to talk about why Lauri Markkanen missed the list by 1 point in just a moment here. But anybody on that list that anybody like really would go to bat for, or are we okay with those guys being honorable mentions and not quite making the cut?
Did you say Cade Cunningham had more votes than Derek White?
Cade and Derek White actually tied. So I had Derek White 30th, yeah. So he got 1 point, and Matt had Cade 30th, so he also got Cade Cunningham got a point.
I personally don't think that's close. Like Derek White is great at what he is, but if you are asking him to be the number 1 on your team, like put him in the role that Cade has to play, I don't think he can perform that anywhere near as well as Cade can.
If he was in Cade's role, the team might only win like 18 games.
Any team coached by Monty Williams at that point is threat of not winning any games.
I personally think Cade he's a number 2 or 3 option at best, in my opinion. I don't look at him as like a number 1.
Yeah, but Derek White is at best a number 4.
Yeah, for sure.
So like that's why like it's not close for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna defend my boy because I voted.
I know White. You are, but like it's it's not for me. So.
Second team all defense NBA last year. Cade Cunningham notably absent from that list. Also, 126 offensive rating, 110 defensive rating for the world champion Boston Celtics this year. So that's why he made my list. I understand why Cade made yours, but let's talk about the actual list because I want to talk about why Lauri Markkanen did not make this list. Player number 30 on the fouled out composite list is Atlanta Hawks point guard Trae Young. Clint voted for Trae Young as the 20th best player in the NBA. Trae Young did not receive any other votes. So Trae Young,
I messed it up again this year.
Trae Young gets the award for only one person voted for me, and I made the list. Last year, that award went to Klay Thompson.
Which was mine again.
Which was also Clint. So say what you will about Clint, but he knows how to get people on this list. And that is why Lauri Markkanen missed, is because Trae Young gets 11 points from Clint for being player number 20 and knocks off Lauri Markkanen and Ja Morant, who both had 10 points. So nobody else voted for Trae. So Clint, I'm going to give you the floor. Why is Trae Young on this list, and why is he so high?
As much shit as I talk about him, like, he's consistent, he does his job, and I think that, like, there's a lack of pieces around him to help him get to that next level. But that's like one of those guys who you're a couple picks deep in your fantasy draft, in like 2K or whatever, like, you're not upset to get him. You're also not like super thrilled, but it's like there are worse players that you could put in that position. And he has a bit of experience now. And I think that trumps a lot of the other kind of qualifiers that are here. There's a couple of guys who it's, their third season or under that have made it. So I think he's like trustworthy in that regard. And, like, that was one of the ones I felt like was safe for him to like float around there.
Yeah, I was thinking about Trae Young because Clint forced me to. I never thought of him for my top 30 list because I just don't think he's a winning player. He's super high usage at 30.5% with medium efficiency. To be nice, he's 20.3 PER. And he's kind of like one of those guys who puts up a lot of empty calories on the basketball court, in my opinion, where it's like the stats are awesome. They're unassailable. You look at it, it's like 25 points a game, 10 assists. Like, you're like, damn, that's a good player. But I just don't know that what he does contributes to winning for me. I don't know, Matt, Devin, you guys, neither of you voted for Trae Young either. Are you kind of on the same page?
I am in the exact same boat as you. Do I think he's not a good enough player to be at number 30 or even 20 on this list? No, like we all have seen what he's capable of. And in fairness, like the pairing with Murray did him no favors whatsoever. He just simply wasn't a guy that I was thinking of. And we've talked about this before. I mean, outside of like your top 15 players is like really where it starts to get tough. And there's like the next 30 or so guys for you could kind of go like really anywhere a lot of times. So you're splitting hairs to get guys into spots. So I'm not mad about it. I just literally didn't think about him at all.
It's interesting to me how like the public perception of Trae Young as a player has like plummeted in such a way since that one playoff run in 2021. I remember everyone was like, myself included, like I was a big fan of him. And it's almost like, I don't know if it seems like he peaked to me at that time and his efficiency was like sort of as high as it ever had gotten, or what it is. I don't know, but my old man comparison to an era long gone at this point, looking at his stats, it reminds me of looking at Stephon Marbury's stats, where I'm like, this guy gets 20 plus points, 8 plus assists every game, but they don't win. Like, I don't really, yeah, I mean, Trae Young doesn't necessarily have the pieces around him to be competitive, but I feel like if he's a top 20 player in the NBA, then maybe he should be able to, I don't know, drag his team to the playoffs at the very least. I mean, like Matt had said with DeJounte Murray, it really didn't do either one of them any favors to be playing with each other. And it's like, whose fault is that? Is it both players? Is it one of them? But I don't know. He seems to be a very heliocentric player, and I just don't really know if it contributes to winning. But at the same time, 26 points a game, 11 assists, there's still some numbers. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I thought the funniest thing about Trae Young was that he had a podcast, right? Like from the point with Trae Young, when it was a couple of years ago or a year ago, when every single NBA player that you never wanted to hear from got a podcast. It's just like him and Paul George and Pat Bev. And the one really interesting thing I would have enjoyed on the podcast was like if he came on and talked honestly about Atlanta's offseason moves this year, where they trade away DeJounte Murray and bring in like Dyson Daniels and some picks. They take Risa Shea with the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. Like, I want to know how you feel about this stuff and where is that episode? Because that would have been a good podcast. And it's like, I haven't heard about Trae Young's podcast since the first time that Matt and I talked about how we never wanted to hear about Trae Young's podcast. So it's just weird. And I actually find that like all of the NBA players who have podcasts are like lower on this list or not on it. So the one interesting piece of content we could have got from an NBA podcast, and they threw it away because it's been an interesting offseason in Atlanta. And I think you could probably still argue that Trae Young doesn't have the pieces he needs to make a serious playoff run. But a couple of years ago, we were doing the podcast when they went to the Eastern Conference Finals and they upset the 76ers in the second round. And I told Matt on the podcast, I was like, dude, last night I was outside, got a basketball court in my backyard, and I was practicing my floater because he had that awesome, like, they would set the pick, he'd get in the lane, he'd do the little floater, and nobody could stop it. And I was like outside practicing that shot. I was going to use this at the gym, man. This is going to be awesome. And that team has made 2 first-round exits since then and missed the playoffs the other 2 years. I don't think that anybody would have thought at that time that that was the trajectory of the Atlanta Hawks. But let's go to player 29. Actually tied with Trae Young in points, and just because of the filter got to be 29 instead of 30. So also with 11 points, Paolo Banchero, a man whose name I will never get correct on this podcast, the forward from the Orlando Magic. I had him at 26. Devin had him at 25, and Matt and Clint did not vote for him. Last year, he was not ranked.
When I made that last move, because I decided to hold firm to my principles of players that don't play aren't going to be on my list, and took Ja off, I moved Kate up to 29, and I had 30 open, and it was between him and Drew for me. Basically, your justifications for why you ranked him is exactly it. Like, he is the number 1 option on a team that did pretty well last year and went to the playoffs. And like, it's not a whole lot else there that's like super compelling around him. I mean, there's other guys that are like good there. There's players that I like, but is there anyone else that's going to like put the team on their back and like carry it for a while? Not really. And he offers a lot more in terms of like playmaking ability too than like most guys in his physical profile. So kind of an interesting player.
Yeah, Matt kind of said it for me, but the reason that I ranked him was not only is he the number 1 option in Orlando, a team that was like a middle of the pack playoff team last year. I think they were like the 4 or the 5 seed. He's the only offensive option in Orlando. There is nobody else there that creates for anybody else and nobody else there that creates for themselves. So he's like the primary creator from the forward position on that team and kind of has to create his own shots. So this is like the ultimate stats versus eye test thing for me, where the advanced stats will tell you that he's pretty inefficient. But if you watch the games, it's like yeah, man, the Magic, there's not a lot going on there offensively, and he's having to do a lot of it for himself from the front court, which is extremely difficult. Also, 7-game playoff series against the Cavs this year, 27, 9, and 4 with an 101 defensive rating in 7 games. So a series that was an absolute rock fight at some points, and he was the only really good thing for Orlando consistently. He is my number one guy who, like, from all the players we're going to talk about today, if I had to pick somebody that's going to be like top 15 next year on this list, I would say it's going to be him. His first 2 seasons in the NBA, he's been rookie of the year. He's played for Team USA in the FIBA Cup, and he's been an all-star. So, and this is all without like a really good point guard to set him up and put him in good positions to score. So I think if they could get him some help, which I would not say that they've necessarily done in this offseason by bringing in like Contavious Caldwell-Pope was their big addition. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. A dude who shoots spot up threes. But I think he has the potential to move up a lot next season. Player 28 is interesting because this is going to be the first guy on the list that we all voted for, but we all had him in kind of the same area. Paul George, the forward now for the Philadelphia 76ers. I had him 28. Matt had him 28. Clint had him 24. Devin at 26. And last year he was not ranked. We all voted for him, but we all have him in the same spot. Why are we all so meh on Paul George?
He's just so off-putting. Like, he's one of those guys that when I'm ranking, it's like it gets to a certain point where it's like, okay, yeah, I have to put him here because he is a good player. Like, he brings a lot when he's out there most of the time.
I don't know how much of it for me is just less to do with Paul George and more to do with the curse of the Clippers. Like, there's been nothing memorable that has really happened to that team. I mean, they had some decent runs in the playoffs a couple years ago, but they're the Clippers and they've never even made it to the conference finals, right? Or no, they've never made it to the finals. Sorry. Yeah, they never made it to the finals in any of these runs. And it's just, how many times have we heard about, oh my gosh, I mean, the Clippers are really deep. I mean, if you look at the West, I mean, who are you going to take over them this year? And I'm like, literally anyone else. When have the Clippers ever done anything good, anything right? And it's like, yeah, he plays more than Kawhi. I do like his game, as kind of a do-it-all player. He's not offensively dominant enough from game to game to be like a number one option, but he certainly looks the part sometimes, like when you watch him play, and he's always been a good defender. I just, he's a number 2, and if he's a number 2 and you've been playing for the Clippers for 4 or 5 years, like, I can't have you that high on this list. Like, I don't know. He's a good player, but good doesn't get you above number 20 for me.
Good player, terrible winner.
Yeah, I think this kind of sums up Paul George. Is he's been in the league for 13 years. He's played like this next season is going to be his 14th. He's made a bunch of money. He's got a bunch of huge contracts. One of you tell me, what is the most memorable playoff moment from Paul George?
I think it's that moment in like 2013 or 2012 when he was like a rookie, or maybe it was his second year, and he had that like that run against the Miami Heat when he was playing very well, and there was a chance that the Pacers were going to beat them. Like, to me, that's it.
I would argue
not even
that
a single moment. It's like a stretch of games.
I would argue his most memorable playoff moment is Dame Lillard hitting the logo buzzer beater over him to send OKC home and like waving goodbye.
Yeah. Forgot about that.
I was waiting for someone else to say it.
That's exactly my point, though, is I'm like, what's his best moment? And it's a bad moment. And then like Devin's trying to name a good one, and it's like, I don't know. He like was kind of good against the Heat once.
Yeah, 10 years ago. Like, it's you know,
that's just the Paul George experience. It's like we're all just sitting here and we're like, yeah, is he a top 30 player? Yes, he has to be on your list. But he's just man. Everything he does is man on and off the court. He could drop 50 points, and I'd be like, that's the most man 50 points that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
As the kids would say, he's mid. But like he's talented enough to be here. So it's just like, I don't know. As soon as I brought it up, I was kind of ready to move on to the next player. So number 27, another guy that we all voted for, actually, which I was kind of surprised about. Pelicans forward Zion Williamson. I had him 27, Matt 23, Clint 30, Devin 24. Last year, he did not make the composite list. Matt, you were adamant that you would not vote for guys who do not play. And yet, you gave Zion the most points of anybody on this podcast.
And Zion is the only guy that generally doesn't play a lot, that when he's at the top of his game, he can be top 10.
Yeah,
like that's worth the risk for me.
I kind of think there's a part of me that's like, I think he could still be the best player on a championship team or the best player on a contender. But he's been in the league for 4 years, or no, he's been in the league for 5 years now after being the number 1 overall pick. Anybody want to guess how many playoff games he's played?
Less than 14.
Pretty sure it's got to be less than 2. Like, I feel like, have they ever been in the playoffs?
You're all correct. It's less than 14. It is less than 2 because it is 0. They have been in the playoffs, but every time they've been in the playoffs, he's been hurt and unable to play. So,
yeah, because the game I'm thinking of, I think he was like iffy heading into it.
I think he played the play-in game.
Yes.
He played the play-in versus the Lakers and got hurt near the end. And then they played Sacramento in the second playoff game and crushed Sacramento even without Zion. And I was like, eh. But there's still a piece of me that's like, look at the stats, look at the guy out on the court. I think he could still be a top 10 player in the NBA. I just need to see more out of him, especially in the playoffs, before I move him up my list.
He effectively had to like rebuild his body to a basketball body rather than, because like when he was playing at Duke, he looked more like a goddamn linebacker than he did a basketball player. Like, this guy was huge. And like, that is sustainable when your season is less than 30 games or when it's floating around 30 games. But for 82 to carry that weight around and to have like all of the issues that he did, like, yeah, it's going to take time for him to adjust and get out of there. So I think he definitely has the capacity, conditioning, and his strength training and what he is trying to accomplish with his extracurricular time in the gym, I think is what's really, really important for him. And if he just got like a little bit more flexibility and like, dropped a few more pounds, I think he'd be like the prime spot for that. But right now he just can't stay healthy.
Yeah, I really thought this year would be the year for him too, because he did play 70 games. Like he played, I think, the most games that he's ever played this season, and just seems like he got hurt at the wrong time. And had a good game against the Lakers in the play-in game too. It's like, dude, we were right there. And we would have seen you as the 8 seed versus the 1 seed Thunder. But this guy just can't stay healthy long enough. And I think that's why he's so low on this list, even though he's so fucking talented. Number 26, speaking of guys who can't stay healthy, is Clippers forward Kawhi Leonard. So Matt and I talked about this last week on the podcast. Neither Matt or I had Kawhi Leonard in our top 30 at all. We both left him out completely for the same reasons. Clint had him at 17. Devin had him at 23. And since we already went over like ad nauseum why he's not on our list on the podcast last week, I'm going to let you guys make the case for why he is on the list.
He's on the list, kind of for the same reason that Paul George is on the list for me. Except he's the number one when he does play. And the interesting thing about Kawhi Leonard is at least when he does play games, he typically plays quite well, except for in the two playoff games that he played this year. But when he's healthy, or not even when he's healthy, just typically when he decides to suit up for a game, he looks like Kawhi Leonard. Like sometimes he looks a little bit more hobbled or injured than he does in other games. But for the most part, he still looks like, a number one option on a playoff team. I really thought I moved him down so far this list. I thought for sure everyone else was going to have him on the list. I'm shocked. I mean, you could have him, some people might still think he's a top 15 player. And I'm just like, no, I'm moving him down at least several spots from that. But it's kind of, and it kind of goes into what I said about Paul George. It's just as much about the LA Clippers as it is about him. It's like, name a single memorable Kawhi Leonard moment with the Clippers. And it's like, you can't really name one. The last time he's really had a memorable moment in the playoffs was, I mean, when he was with Toronto. I don't know. He's not healthy enough to go deep into the playoffs. The playoffs is when his body breaks down every single year. He's played 4 playoff games in the past 2 years. Being available at that point in time it's the most important part of your season. And if you're not showing up for that, then and you're not making deep playoff runs, I can't have you high on this list if you're supposed to be the best player on the team.
Yeah, I feel like we did to Devin what Matt always does to me on this podcast, where I'm like, I have a spicy take. I'm going to give it to Matt and see how he feels. And then Matt fucking yes ands me, where I'm like, Matt, I think Matt Stafford's a top 10 quarterback. And he goes, well, I think Matt Stafford's a top 5 quarterback. And then I'm like sitting here defending like why I'm like pushing back against my own take, where I'm like, okay, he's not that high, and I end up like having to fight against the thing that I set out to do in the first place. Where Devin came in with a list that he's like, I'm going to knock Kawhi down this list and put him at 23. And Matt and I are like, this guy's not on our fucking list at all. Screw this guy.
He's had memorable moments in LA. Like he debuted his New Balance sneakers when he got out there, and that's important. So like,
is that enough to open a brand new stadium in Inglewood around?
For those goddamn savages out in California, you bet your bottom dollar it is. He played 68 games this year, so it's more than the past couple of seasons. I think going back to 2017 actually. But I put him up there out of respect. I mean, he's a guy that if he's, like you guys say, if he's on the court, you have to honor him. And like that, I think that alone puts you in a position where it's like, well, yeah, I mean, he might not play that often, but it's certainly not a person that you can just say, okay, well, like Kawhi's going to have to beat us tonight. Like that's no game plan has ever been made with somebody saying that. So I like, that's why I put him where I did. I didn't think that like his performances were inconsistent enough to warrant him not being on the list, but I can see why, he would be lower on there based on other people's opinions. But I still think that if he gets into a position where like he's healthy relatively, that like he could still make like a run in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you guys are saying about what he's like on the court. But I Adam, you really did put it best when we were talking about it. And it at the end of the day, I know you're not going to be there when I need you most. Because this has been so prolonged. This goes all the way back to San Antonio, the health stuff.
I think that's the thing, and that's what Matt and I talked about last week, is it's not are you going to be there when I need you? Like it is with some of these other guys. I know I can't count on you when I need you. He's been in LA for 5 years. He's played an average of 46 games per year, even after playing 68 this year. And in the last 2 seasons, he's played 4 playoff games, 2 this year and 2 last year before he got hurt in each of the last playoffs. So I'm just at the point with him where when I make my list, I'm looking at like, okay, I'm trying to win a championship, or the 30 guys in order that I would take if I'm trying to win a championship. And if I got to pay Kawhi Leonard $50 million a year for 46 regular season games and 2 playoff games, I'm just not winning a championship with that guy. And I wouldn't, I had Derek White, number 30, and I left Kawhi off. Is Derek White a better basketball player than Kawhi Leonard? Absolutely not. Like, I 100% agree with what you guys are saying. If he was healthy for a playoff run, he can be the best player on a championship team still. It's just that he's not going to be healthy. I just can't count on that guy. So, player number 25, lightning rod pick here. Kyrie Irving, the point guard from the Dallas Mavericks. Matt and I talked last week about, I had Kyrie on my list. I had him 24. Matt left him off. And I was interested to see where Devin and Clint came in, because that was going to determine where he landed. He's number 25 because I had him 24. Clint has him 26. Devin had him 21. Last year, he was not ranked at all. I know Matt's opinion of why he's not on this list is well documented on the podcast. You want to give us the Cliff Notes version real quick?
Yeah, well, and Devin, you've heard my take on him for a long time now, but I can sum it up pretty clearly. Of all the 30 players that are on this list, Kyrie Irving is the only player who I am concerned that his play on the court might actually lose you the big game. Because, like, I absolutely hate his play style because it's selfish, and, like, to even call it heliocentric is like watering it down. It really does like suck the air out of the rest of his teammates. I don't want that guy on my team. Now, like, am I going to go so far as to say he's not like a good player? Yeah, like if we were going to like 40, he'd totally be there. But like, this guy's play style is just not something I can palate.
I'm going to say the bold thing. He's a better basketball player than Cade Cunningham.
It's unfortunately true.
Bold take. Clint, I kind of expected you to leave Kyrie off of your list based on the conversations that we've had while you've been on the podcast. But you had him on. Why did you include him?
Well, I mean, he was the second option in the runner-up like this year. I think that warrants a little bit of putting respect on his name. I'm in the same camp kind of as Matt, except my issues are not with his play. I think he's a fucking terrible teammate. I think that he makes a lot of decisions and like for himself, doesn't look out for other people. You shouldn't be in street clothes or not going to away games. Like, it's your job to play ball. You're getting paid an absorbent amount of money to do so. And like my issue is like with just kind of how things turn cancerous when he's around. And like, yeah, you can be the most skilled player in the world. I don't fucking want that.
So,
because it rips teams apart, and like he's wore out his welcome a couple times. So I'm just like, you could blame some of that on Harden. You can blame some of that on being in LeBron's shadow. But at the end of the day, like
we saw how quickly it blew up when he was the number one on his team.
Yeah,
that blew up really, really quick.
Oh, in Boston, yeah, that was a problem. But so here's my argument. Yes, he has been very, problematic and cancerous, even as much as last year, as early as last year. But this season with Dallas, he was never that. and they made it to the finals, and he was the second option on the team. And did he play well in the finals? No. So I can understand the criticism of his play style in terms of how he played in this particular finals run. But I've never looked at his play style and thought that it hurted your chances for winning, because when he's at his best, he isn't the number one option. So those sort of like, isolation gunner volume shooter instincts that he like really, and he's, one of the might be the best ball handler of all time, like might have the best handle of all time. And he can finish the way he can finish over taller defenders in the paint. I mean, it's debatable, but it is debatable. He's debatably one of those players.
Yeah.
I think he brings in, and not only, and he has a championship to show for it. And he has like one of the, one of the most popular shots to like clinch a final series of all time as being the number 2 option behind, a player that clearly like was leading a team, over him. So I don't know. I really think he's had a bunch of, issues with the media, with his personal life, whatever. However, he was ruining team chemistry in a lot of ways, and I was not a fan. But he didn't do that this year. And if I'm voting for the top 30 players this year, the way he played, this is individually, like, this is one of, I think, the best individual regular seasons he has had in a very long time, and it impacted winning. They made it to the finals.
Yeah, the last thing that I want to say is, and Matt, you and I kind of talked about this when we were watching the finals together. Like, he has to go and go and go, and he doesn't know when to fucking stop. So like, he'll just continue to make bad plays if he's not on. And it's like, no, you have to establish a rhythm. Like, you have to get into your step. And if that means trying to take it to the rack and getting a couple easy ones before you put your next 3-pointer up when you've missed a fucking ass load of them already, like, and that's like one of the things. It does remind me a lot of his alma mater at Duke, where it's like they live and die by the 3. And in the NBA, when you have his skill set, you shouldn't have to live and die by the 3. Like, you should be able to create opportunities and openings for yourself, go to the stripe, maybe, put some baskets in, and, get back into your rhythm that way to pick up some confidence. But to just keep jacking up outside shots, that's why he's low on my list, is just because like he's a liability in the sense that when he's off, he's really off, and he believes every single one of those balls that leaves his hands is going in the rim, and like that can be very dangerous sometimes.
Yeah, I have 2 points before we go on to the next player. One is that I don't disagree with anything that was said, but I do think the selfishness and like the gunner instincts, like Devin and Matt mentioned, were what the Mavericks actually needed this season. Because if you watch that team beyond Luka Doncic, there were no offensive options that were going to create anything for themselves. Like, Derrick Jones Jr. couldn't hit the red side of a barn. Their other guys were just lob threats, like Lively and Gafford were not doing anything beyond catching lobs. Lively was creating a little bit, but like nothing really scoring. So they kind of needed him to be selfish and put up shots, which kind of brings me to my second point, is that everybody wants to punish him for how bad he was in the finals. And I get that. But then we also forget how great he was against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. Like, he averaged 25 points a game, put up multiple 30 balls, and absolutely cooked Anthony Edwards that entire series. So I know our last memory of him is not good, but they're not even in that position in the first place unless he balls out leading up to that point, which is why he's on my list.
Yeah, so real quick rebuttal there is that I don't care that he missed shots, because that happens like all the time. My issue is that we know from watching him play for years that he would rather continue to miss shots than try to create for others. And that was precisely what the Mavericks needed in the finals, was for him to create for others. Because, yeah, like outside of him and Luka, they just have a bunch of role players. And that's what role players need. And they need to get going early because asking them to get going in the third quarter is an unrealistic ask because they're role players.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to understand that.
I do think that he is one of the only guys that's going to be on this list that's like, yes, you can win big games because of him, but also you can lose big games because of him.
Yeah.
And it just kind of comes, there's a bigger conversation to be had that we won't have on this podcast about like, okay, what's your criteria for ranking guys 1 through 30? Because the criteria that was given was who are the best 30 players in the NBA. No rules. You just pick whoever you want. And it just shows like the different things that all 4 of us value of like what this guy brings to the table. On to player number 24, though, and it is Tyrese Maxey, point guard for the Philadelphia 76ers. I had him 25. Matt had him 18. Clint had him at 25, and Devin did not have him ranked. So go to Devin first. Why didn't you include Tyrese Maxey in your top 30?
I really like Tyrese Maxey. I really do. I don't think he has the resume yet. I mean, really, he's been playing with Embiid, and yes, as much as I think we all know how we all feel about Joel Embiid, he still is a number 2 behind a guy who's demanding so much defensive attention. It makes your job easier. But at the same time, he also plays well when Embiid isn't there, as far as I'm aware. Maybe not quite as well, but I need to see a little bit more of it. I need to see another year with you having added offensive responsibility. He has shown year after year that he can do that so far. So, he won most improved player. Certainly is an all-star caliber talent with, I think, room to be an all-NBA type of player. I need to see more of it before I can really say you're a top 30 player in the NBA.
I think that's fair. My kind of thing with I'm kind of middle of the road on him, where he was another guy where I was like, yeah, he's a top 30 player. I'm not super duper excited about him because even though the stats are really good, I would like to see a little bit more efficiency out of him. His PER is just under 20. He shoots 45% from the floor on just over 20 shots per game this year to put up 26 points per game. And his defensive rating is 117. So I'm like, I want to see a little bit more, but I think it's there because the offensive rating the last 3 years was 121, 120, and 121 again. And then they go into that series against the Knicks this year, and he puts up 35 and 7 on 48% field goal shooting. So I'm like, dude, if you do what you did in that playoff series for a whole season, I think you're going to be top 15 on this list next year. But I'm kind of in the same spot as Devin, where I'm like, yeah, we've seen the flashes. We've seen how good you can be, but we've also seen how inconsistent you can be. And I just want to see a little bit more before I'm like, okay, yeah, this guy's a top 20, top 15, top 10 guy. I don't know, Matt, you had him the highest. You had him all the way up at 18.
Yeah. I'm just going to call this the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander lesson. Like, I'm going to stop being late on guys. Because, I mean, all of us, I think, we're always just kind of like a little, like, hesitating a little bit on pushing Shea up where we wanted him to be. But, like, we're seeing what we want to see from Maxey. Maybe not necessarily the consistency, but, like, he's been in the league, like, what, 4 years?
Yeah. He
Like,
just signed a contract for his 5th season.
Yeah. I mean, he's a young, growing player. Like, he's that I'm less concerned about. Seeing how he played without Embiid and in the playoffs, like, that means more to me than some of the inconsistencies, because who knew, like, people in their early 20s can be inconsistent sometimes. Like, he's going to get better next year. And like, I think is worth factoring into my rating. So
I think all fair.
I've always liked Maxey. Like, I'm pretty sure I've been on the podcast and talked about how I've liked his game and what I felt he was capable of. He's undersized just as like a general NBA player. He's 6'2", 200 pounds, which I mean that's pretty heavy for somebody that's short. But I like the way he plays, and I think that in spite of a lot of defensive attention being put on Joel Embiid, like he is fulfilling the role that they need fulfilled right now. And going into his 5th season, I think that that's really, really important, and it needs to be, like praised. Because like, who are his examples to like really figure that out when he came in? It's been a rotating door of bullshit in Philadelphia. Like,
yeah,
so like he's been really resilient. A couple of plays here or there go the other way, and like Philadelphia could have gotten past the dreaded second round.
Yeah.
But I just think that like he's got a lot of raw skill, and I just think he's gonna get better like wine with age. Like I really believe that.
I'm at the point where if I did not know who to draft in the NBA draft, I would just take a guard from Kentucky because they do not miss. Like the last 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, it's been like Fox, Booker, Maxey, Monk. Like there's all these guys, and it just makes me feel like, Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham are probably going to be better than I gave them credit for going into the draft, because I'm just like, dude, I saw a post on Reddit. It was like 11 guards from Kentucky taken in the last like 7 years, and they're all good players. Even guys like Kason Wallace, who went late last year, has been like a really good defensive piece for OKC. So I'm like, yeah, I just take the Kentucky guard. It'll be fine. Player number 23, and we're kind of in this like area of our list where we lumped all of the smaller guards together, where it's like we have Kyrie, we have Maxey, and now at 23 we have Donovan Mitchell. I had him 21, Matt had him 26, Devin all the way up at 15, and then Clint did not list him at all. Last year he was player 19 on the list, so he's gone down 4 spots. My big thing with Donovan Mitchell, and the reason I had him, is because I think we saw the return a little bit of the playoff Donovan Mitchell that we were also afraid of in Utah. 2019 in Utah, he averages 36 points per game in 7 playoff games. 2020, he averages 32 in 10 games. Also in 2020, he dropped a 57 ball on the Nuggets, which is the 3rd most points ever in an NBA playoff game. And then we kind of saw that guy went away for a couple of years, where he averaged like 25 points a game, 23 points a game, like not horrible, but also not like what we expected him to do, where he was really taking this big step up for the playoffs. And then he comes back this year and averages 29.6 in 10 games, including a 50 ball in game 6 against Orlando, 39 in game 7. And then his 3 games against Boston are 33, 29, and 33 again on awesome shooting efficiencies. Like he was shooting 50% or more against Boston. And I really think the injury versus Boston kind of robbed him of being higher on this list, which I know for him is probably the worst thing to come out of that injury. He's like, damn it, I could have been top 20 on that one podcast. Sucks. But Clint, you didn't have him ranked at all.
I don't think he's terrible. It's just one of those things where it's like I gotta see him like be better than just scoring points. Like winning in the postseason is really important. That's why you play the game. And like he's got time to get his feet under him in that regard. But
yeah, Devin,
I'm just kind of lukewarm on it.
Devin, you had him the highest.
Yeah. So he's not a perfect player, obviously, but I do take into account like responsibility or like, role on the team into my considerations very heavily. And like, the Cavaliers, they have some stuff. They've got some pieces, but like they really need a guy to go out there and just try to score 25 to 30 every game. And, I I I understand the deficiencies with his game, but if I'm looking at some of the other players that I put below him, like outside of a few, I would say he has a lot more responsibility to the team than a lot of those other players that I listed. And it's just, like you had said, his playoff run this year overall, 29.6 points per game, pretty good efficiency. Uh, I just, it, I don't know. And I think a huge part of it as well is just still the Pistons fan in me, where I look at his game and I accept all of the flaws, and I just think to myself, the Pistons could have drafted him, and maybe he wouldn't be there anymore. I mean, he left Utah, but like I just look at are we being too hard? Are we too critical for someone who's like basically an all-star slash borderline like all NBA third team type of player? Like I get it, like we can poke holes in his game all day long, but he does a lot of things that not many players can do.
Yeah, he has been particularly difficult for me to rank going back to like those last couple years in Utah, because part of the allure to him his first few years in the league too was that like he came in as like a force defensively, and that part of his game is changed quite a bit. But to kind of piggyback off of what Devin's saying there too, responsibility plays a huge role in that. And so like how do I grade that when I know the kind of offensive load that this guy has to carry? And that part isn't really different in Cleveland. Like, yeah, Garland's there, but like how did things go when Garland was their best player, right? So you're probably not going to have Evan Mobley or Jared Allen run your offense. So like, yeah, he's forced into that role again. So I knew he had to be on here, and much like you, Devin, I do really there's probably an element of the Pistons fan in me that like kind of gravitates to him, but it's the defensive side of the ball that kind of have some sagging for me a little bit. If we saw that recover, he'd probably shoot up pretty quickly. But yeah, like I said earlier, just kind of got to split hairs at this point.
Yeah, Darius Garland's not on this list for anybody that's wondering, but I think the funny thing with him is he's like, I'm going to demand a trade if Donovan Mitchell is still here next season. And then the Cavs give Donovan Mitchell a max extension, and Darius Garland's like, I don't want to be traded anymore. I'm fine. Empty threats. Player number 22, another guard who steps up in the postseason, Nuggets point guard Jamal Murray. I had him 23. Clint had him 16, Devin 18, but Matt not on the list at all. He was 21 last year, so he's down one spot. Matt, we'll start with you. Why no Jamal Murray?
He was one of the guys that I was considering in those last few spots. It really just kind of came down to it for me that some of those guys were just, it's combination of like responsibility and not to take away credit from Jamal Murray, but I think we all know that playing basketball with Nikola Jokic makes your life easier. And so I think I talked about this last year too, that like because of that, it's hard for me to place him because I like a lot of what I see, and it's hard for me to divorce that from some of the environment of that. So like I left him off. I've had him on in past years. This is kind of the range that he kind of always falls in for me. So between there and like the honorable mentions. So I have no issue with him being in the early 20s. I think he's easily talented enough. So
Yeah, my thing with him is that we've seen that he can be the second best player on a championship team. And I think that question's still kind of out there for some of these guys it's like, can you be the best player on or the second best player on a championship team? I don't know. Maybe I think so. Jamal Murray is like, yeah, we know. And he's had some huge playoff performances. Obviously, the playoffs were really rough for him this year, but I think it really outlined to me how important he is to the Nuggets winning when it gets later in the postseason. In their playoff wins this postseason, he averaged 22.14 points per game. In the losses, he averaged 18.4. I know it's like a 4-point difference, but some of those losses were really bad, where he had like 8 points in game 2 against the Timberwolves. And when he was good in that Timberwolves series, the Nuggets won and the Nuggets were winning. Like he had like 20 something points in the first half of game 7 and they were winning by a lot. And then he completely ran out of gas in the second half of game 7, kind of partially due to injury, partially due to the Wolves defense. But when he ran out of gas, it was like over. The Wolves completely took that game in Denver. So I know it's hard to say like if he wasn't playing with Jokic, how good would he be? But it's also pretty clear that he's extremely important to the success of that team. So it's like one of those things you got to balance when you're doing this ranking. And then player number 21, the last guy we're going to talk about today. And I think the only guy, at least in today's list, where I've been the highest, and maybe too high, number 21 is Bucks point guard Damian Lillard. I had him all the way up at 15 on my list. Matt was 17. Clint was 22, if I can read my own handwriting. And Devin was down at 29. Last year, Dame Lillard was player number 9 on the composite list. So he's actually he's our biggest faller from 9 all the way down to 21. I had him the highest, so I'm going to give my 2 cents for why I still think he's the top 15 player in the NBA. I was going to put him lower originally because it's been an up and down season. Definitely was not what a lot of us expected for his first season in Milwaukee. But if you go back to that playoff series against Indiana, he only played in 4 games, but the 4 games he played in, he averaged 31.3 points per game. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, cool. You averaged a bunch of points, but your team lost. They lost 3 of the games that he played in. But I look at that Bucks team without Giannis, since he was out. That Bucks roster without Giannis is worse than the Portland team he played for last year. That was like one of the bottom teams in the league. That Bucks roster is horrible without Giannis Antetokounmpo. It is bad. Like I defy you guys to name 3 starters, not named Dame Lillard, from the Bucks playoff team this year with Giannis out.
Bobby Portis start?
He did. He did. I think like you could get Brooke Lopez and Bobby Portis, but like that third guy, it's like
Middleton.
Oh, but Middleton.
Okay. I have been defied. Middleton, who just had surgery on both ankles today.
Yep.
So they're old, they're slow, they look like they couldn't keep up with the Pacers at all. And Damian Lillard was like, I'm going to drag this team to be somewhat relevant without Giannis. And that's why I have him. And it's probably one of those things where Dame is going to be one of the guys that I'm just going to be too late on. And I've accepted that. And maybe I should have him lower, but I don't want to have him in the 20s. And then next season he comes back and is Dame Lillard again. And I'm sitting here being like, God damn it, I ranked Dame too low.
I guess so. My biggest issue with Damian Lillard this season was, like you had just mentioned, the Bucks are old and slow. And defensively, what does Damian Lillard help with that situation? Because, like, to me, he makes that entire thing worse. Like, he compounds it. Like, he's so bad on defense. And for a team that is already old and slow, adding I don't want to say he's old yet. He's like 34 years old, but clearly he doesn't look the same I mean, I think a lot of that was just growing pains, moving to a new team, trying to figure out how to play with Giannis. Because I think he really started to improve later on in the year, but I just, I don't know. They got rid of Drew Holiday, who, you know, I think a lot of people were, whatever Drew Holiday had to be like the second option on a team. People were like, oh man, maybe he's not that good. But then you see how good he was in Boston as in the role that he played there. And I just, if I'm just swapping Drew Holiday for Damian Lillard for how they worked on the Bucks team, like Damian Lillard can't guard anybody. Like and Drew Holiday can guard multiple positions sometimes, and
Yeah.
they were always to me like a more defensive focused team. And just with Giannis there, basically barreling into the paint, getting you 30 points a game around like players that can maybe spot up and play defense. Brook Lopez is a stretch five. And Damian Lillard, it's like if your production is going to fall off offensively, I mean, I know in the playoffs he did average 30 points a game, so I'm going to be, try to watch my words here. But overall, his production fell off like from last year, and it's like, sure, you're adjusting to playing with someone who is now leading the team when you aren't, but like if your offensive production is going to dip, like you need to be able to pick up something else in your game, probably defense, and that just ain't it for Dame Lillard. Defense is not his calling card.
Playing out scenarios. I think emotionally he was exhausted this season. Like he kind of got jerked around. Having to move. I'm pretty sure he had some stuff going on in his personal life that probably didn't help things. So like I am gonna give Damian Lillard benefit of the doubt and still say that like he's the guy that he can be. But like seeing his situation, it just seemed like he was tired. And like not trying to make excuses for him, but like I think that he'll bounce back and he'll have a way better season next year. He'll understand what kind of like system the coach is running and whatnot. I don't think the transition to playing with Giannis is very easy for someone who's a very I don't want to say ball dominant because he does a great job passing and stuff, but I mean like he
high
demands
usage.
the ball. Yeah. So like I think figuring those things out is like a pretty big ask. And then like all the personal stuff and all of the move, and I know that like he was really dedicated to the fan base out in Portland. So I think that like next season he'll come back and he'll have some like really good things to show us.
Yeah, that, and who knows how true the story is, but the story that he wasn't working out in the offseason because he didn't want to risk getting hurt and then not being traded because of it. I think there were a lot of dominoes that fell in a particular way that did not set him up to be physically or mentally ready to play at the start of the season. He did what he could in the playoffs. Like you're not going to do much there. My concern with him, and I dropped him because of this, is just that like, okay, well, there's all these reasons, but like you were out there, you're out on the court. I'm not making an excuse. So like, show me that you're Dame next year and you can pop back up there. I'm not going to call them red flags yet, but there are at least some yellow flags of concern that like maybe this is the start of his decline. We don't know. Like it's weird. Yeah, like his production did fall off, but how much of that too is just like when you share a bunch of minutes with Giannis, like there's only one ball, right? So like they can't both get points on the same possession. So like there's a lot to parse out here.
Yeah, my hot take for Dame is that if
every single person involved in the Dame trade from Portland to Milwaukee could have that trade back, that they would all take it back and just do the Miami trade. I think that like looking at it a year later, if you're like, obviously Miami would want Dame. The Bucks, I think, might regret that decision to get rid of Drew Holiday and might have just rather had him with Giannis this season. I think if you're Portland, you probably still could get DeAndre Ayton and you maybe would have got some better assets out of that deal. And then if you're the Suns, you probably could have had Tyler Hero instead of Grayson Allen, right? So I think everybody would probably be better off. And I know this podcast would be better off because we were just like Dame, Jimmy, and Bam are podcast favorites. We would love to have them all.
Well, and like, honestly, if I'm Portland, I go back on that deal just so I don't have to take Ayton.
The most important thing for Portland, and the reason that Portland is still the biggest winner here, is because Mick Cronin cucked Pat Riley. And that was the whole point of this thing. And I honestly
was.
I think there's an alternate reality where Dame goes to Miami and we're not sitting here having to talk about the Boston Celtics being the 2024 NBA champions. But that was the whole point of Cronin sending him somewhere else, is he was like, fuck you, Miami. I will not be cucked. You will be cucked. And he did it. So
this is my cuckening.
But for now, there is an episode of this podcast called The Cuckening from when Dame was traded, just so people know. But that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. Let us know who you think the top 30 players in the NBA are. And you can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. This podcast is going to come out Thursday, July 18th. Next week, Thursday, we will be back with players number 20 through 11, which is going to include two of my favorites from Sacramento, as well as my hill that I will die on, and also Clint's hottest take that I think is probably going to be the hottest take of this entire top 30 list next week. That's going to be player number 11, so you guys can look forward to that. Also, Matt yelling at everybody about Jalen Brunson next week. I don't want to give away where he's rated, but I know Matt's pretty pissed about that. So
the disrespect.
But thank you guys for being here. Thanks for voting again. This is fun. I'm looking forward to getting into next week and the week after, where the conversations kind of get a little bit more tense with some more passionate feelings about the players. I think this week is more like, okay, I told Matt the top half of the list is like, where do you rank these guys? Because we're all going to have the same guys. And the bottom half of the list is like, who did you put on it? And who did Clint get added to this list by himself? This here is Trae Young. So
single-handedly.
But all right, guys.
Trae Young, not the best, certainly not the worst
on the list. But all right, guys, we'll see you next week. Thanks for being here. And thank you everybody for listening.
Yep. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye, guys. Bye, Mom.
Bye, Robin.